All right, what's up, everybody? It's Roman Gennaro of the Empire Sports Talk podcast, and we are here for episode 99. It might be a couple weeks before we're able to do our big episode 100 because we're waiting on a couple of things to finalize to make that a huge episode. So there might be a small hiatus depending on if we can get stuff here in time and get things coordinated. But hopefully it won't be too long and we can bring you the great 100th episode that we are hoping to have. With that being said, we have a lot to cover, so let's jump right in. The first thing I want to touch on is the last thing I mentioned last time, is that we have a World Series to talk about. It is the Yankees and Dodgers, as we predicted it might be based on how things looked on Wednesday when we talked about it, and both teams have closed out. It's the Yankees and Dodgers. It is the 12th time that these two teams have faced off in the World Series, with the Yankees leading the all-time series 8-3. Now, this does factor in the Dodgers' time in both Brooklyn and Los Angeles, with Los Angeles being the victor the last time these two teams met in 1981. They won in 6 games. So the Dodgers look to win their 4th of these 12 meetings, whereas the Yankees look for their first World Series championship since 2009. I did read that this will be the 28th time that MVPs will face off in the World Series. I didn't find the actual number on this, but I feel like this has got to be a record for most collective MVP awards. Between two World Series teams, you have Judge that has going to be multiple, Ohtani going to be multiple, Freeman, Betts. Stanton doesn't have one, but he should. You could say the same thing for Juan Soto. So the number of MVP awards between these two teams is staggering. I'm very interested in this World Series, and I definitely have my rooting interest, but I have to, the people that have to be the most excited about this World Series is the MLB offices. This is exactly what they wanted. Ohtani versus Judge, LA versus New York, huge market versus huge market. It's a little bit boring if you're not a massive fan of one of these teams. It's exciting in the fact that we get Shohei Ohtani in the World Series and Aaron Judge in the World Series, but baseball has been really good about having the most parity among teams. The Yankees only have one World Series since 2009. The Dodgers have been in it several times, but only one World Series victory in the last several years. So baseball's been really good about giving us those stories of like the underdogs coming through and getting to the championship and winning the championship, but to see the Washington Nationals do it in 2019, to see the Rays get to the World Series in 2020, to see the Braves win it in 2021, you get these story. In 2016, you have the two teams with the longest droughts in sports facing off. Baseball's always been really good about giving us great storylines and great parity, and this still is a great storyline with the two MVPs, with two of the greatest players the game has seen. But it's just the fact that it's the Yankees and the Dodgers. It's a little bit boring from that standpoint of like, hey, it's the two teams with the highest payrolls. It's the two teams in the biggest market. It's this kind of thing. But I'm still excited for the World Series. I'm gonna release a more detailed article about my prediction for the World Series. But I do believe I would give the Yankees the edge in this one, because I do believe that the Dodgers pitching has been a little bit questionable throughout the playoffs. I think Giancarlo Stanton and Juan Soto in particular are on fire right now. But beyond anything, I hope that this series goes 6 or 7 games. We get our money's worth, because the LCSs were left a little bit to be desired. There were some big moments. There were some competitive moments, but for the most part, the Yankees and Dodgers kind of had their way with their opponents, and so I'm hoping that this World Series is close, competitive. There's a lot of action, a lot of tense moments, and I can't wait to see what happens on Friday when it kicks off with Game 1. But moving on to the NFL, where we're going to spend the majority of our time. Just a couple news and notes here. First things first, the Minnesota Vikings suffered their first loss of the season in an absolute classic against the Detroit Lions. This was a battle between two teams that were not only fighting for supremacy in the NFC North, but fighting for supremacy as to be called at this point in the season the best team in the NFC. And it looked early like Minnesota was going to run away with it, but Detroit, I believe Minnesota was up 14-0, but Detroit fought back and ended up winning the game with a game-winning field goal as time was running down. I believe the final score was 31-29. The Lions come out on top, and now both teams have one loss. I do think those are the two best teams in the NFC still, and I'm really excited to see who comes out on top. I think Jared Goff is cementing himself right now as the best quarterback in the NFC, and right now the best quarterback in the NFL, because I don't think there's anybody rivaling him in the NFL as a whole, except for maybe Josh Allen, who's the last starting quarterback left to not throw an interception, which I don't feel like is getting talked about enough, because the national narrative on Josh Allen is that he's subpar and he turns the ball over and he does all this stuff. And now the team went out and got Amari Cooper to give the Bills more help. And Amari Cooper struck early with his new team, scoring a touchdown. And things are looking really good for Josh Allen and the Bills right now. So it'll be interesting to see how the MVP race shapes up. As we get closer to the halfway point, Lamar Jackson is obviously also playing very, very well. But right now I do think Jared Goff looks like the best player in the NFL, the best quarterback in the NFL. But they do hand Minnesota their first loss. The lone undefeated team left in the National Football League, which is kind of crazy when you dig into it, is the Kansas City Chiefs. They beat San Francisco pretty convincingly in a rematch of the Super Bowl. Brock Purdy had 3 interceptions, and despite the fact that Patrick Mahomes hasn't played particularly well so far to start the year, he's not what we're used to seeing from Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City's still finding a way to win. No Hollywood Brown, no Rashee Rice. Patrick Mahomes isn't playing the way that we normally see him playing. Pacheco is hurt. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is hurt. Like, all these weapons that they have that are not available, and Kansas City keeps winning. To put numbers to that, Patrick Mahomes has 1,389 yards, which is 16th in the NFL. He's got 6 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. And he's got a 61 QBR, which is 11th in the National Football League. The Chiefs, are not in the top 5 in any major statistical category. So as units, they're playing middle of the pack. But that tells you how resilient and kind of how much of a force this team is, that nothing seems to be breaking their way on paper. The injuries and the numbers aren't going their way, but they're still finding ways to win. And that's what's scary, because this was a team last year that had a bunch of guys in the receiver room that didn't even know what it meant to catch a football at times. Like, it didn't seem like some receivers, a particular one that shall remain nameless, knew what they were doing out there, knew that the point was to catch the ball. And this Kansas City team still managed to win a Super Bowl. So with the struggles that Patrick Mahomes has had and the adversity that this team has already faced with injuries, if they figure things out and start to get people back, and they get better when they're already 5-0 playing like this, that is a scary, scary, scary thought. But Kansas City is the last undefeated team in the NFL, winning against the San Francisco 49ers, who aren't looking like the 49ers we expected. They're dealing with some injuries of their own. Christian McCaffrey still isn't back. I believe Deebo Samuel had to leave the game at some point yesterday. Kyle Shanahan fears that Brandon Ayuk might have torn ACL. So the 49ers aren't the team that we expected them to be. They fall to 3-4. Kansas City remains undefeated despite their struggles, which is in itself remarkable. The biggest story, I think, for me this week was Russell Wilson started on Sunday Night Football against the Jets for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I have to say, there's been a lot of talk about Russell Wilson the last few years, and a lot of talk about Russell Wilson and Justin Fields this offseason as to when Russell Wilson comes back healthy, who is the starter? When Russell Wilson is available, do they stay with Justin Fields? Do they do this? And there was a lot of chatter that Russell Wilson wasn't what he used to be, and Russell Wilson can't do anything that Justin Fields can't do, and all of these things. And I thought, my thought on that from the beginning was like, Russell Wilson might not be what he used to be. He might be a grizzled veteran now, but Justin Fields has done some good things, but he has not wowed anybody his whole career. He's had subpar coaching in Chicago. He's had with no weapons. He comes to Pittsburgh, and while it's a good situation, he's still young. He still has turnover issues. So he didn't do anything he just played okay. And when you have aspirations at the playoffs and more, like Mike Tomlin has always had with the Pittsburgh Steelers, regardless of if they made it far or not, playing just okay isn't going to cut it. So I think Mike Tomlin made the right call in terms of if they're going to make a run at the playoffs, which right now they have the record. Right now they are leading the NFC North. You have to at least see what you have, because what happens if you stick with Justin Fields through week 13 because he's just playing okay and doing just enough to get by, and then he gets hurt, and then you bring in an older Russell Wilson who hasn't played all season in week 13, not knowing what he gives you, and then that's a mess. So I think Mike Tomlin made a good call where he said, hey, we're going to throw Russell Wilson out there now just to see what we have, because that's who I expected to be my starting quarterback. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's against the Jets. We can probably still pull it out. And Russell Wilson turned back the clock. Russell Wilson played very, very well. The Steelers won the game 37-15, which was a welcome sight because the Steelers have only scored above 30 points one other time this season. They've averaged 20 points a game. Chris Boswell has been very, very busy as the field goal kicker because they haven't scored a lot of touchdowns. To that point, Justin Fields only had one touchdown all season to a wide receiver. Russell Wilson had two on Sunday night. Russell Wilson had 264 yards and 2 touchdowns, no turnovers. Did he set the world on fire? No. He was not perfect. He made a few throws that were questionable. He got bailed out by Pickens a couple of times. But the most important thing is he got Pickens involved as the vertical threat that he is. And he did make some really good throws. He made one really good throw to Pat Freiermuth down the field. Najee Harris got going, and Russell Wilson was playing with a fire at one point that we just haven't seen from Justin Fields. We have 10 plus years of tape on Russell Wilson being a Super Bowl winning quarterback, being a Hall of Fame caliber quarterback. We don't have that assurance with Justin Fields. I think Justin Fields can still be that guy. But if Russell Wilson keeps playing like this, that's your starter. And if Mike Tomlin thought that Russell Wilson was his starter at the beginning of the year, Justin Fields hasn't done anything in Russell Wilson's absence to say, this job is absolutely mine. And if Russell Wilson can give you anything more, you have to try. And last night, it looked like he gave the Steelers the jolt they seem to have been missing despite their good record. And so I think until further notice, there is no QB competition in Pittsburgh. Russell Wilson looked like prime Russell Wilson. And if he can continue that, the Steelers look more dangerous than we thought they were. Speaking of quarterback controversies, I spend a lot of time watching this team and talking about this team. I want to talk about the Indianapolis Colts. Is there a quarterback controversy in Indianapolis? I'll say this. I believe that Anthony Richardson is supremely gifted and supremely talented. I believe that when he smooths out some of the rough patches from just not playing a lot of football, I think he could be really dangerous. I believe he is the quarterback of the future for Indianapolis. I do not believe he is the quarterback of the present if Indianapolis is serious about winning games. Yes, they won against Miami on Sunday. But it was against Miami. It was against a Miami team who started the game with their backup quarterback and ended up finishing with a third-string quarterback. A Miami team who didn't target Tyreek Hill for the entire first half, and I think only targeted him twice in the whole game. A Miami team that couldn't get anything going offensively, and yet it took until the second half for Indianapolis to take the lead and keep it. This, despite the fact that Indy won, there were still some glaring issues with Anthony Richardson. He's still running straight at defenders, putting his head into their chest, which he doesn't seem to be taking more care. He did slide a few times on design runs, which actually prompted the crowd to cheer. But then there was other times where he literally led with his head and got himself in some very questionable positions. He still can't make the basic throws. He's still missing the basic throws. He was 10 for 24 for 129 yards. He had a 42.8 quarterback rating, which is 27th in the league. And he's got 3 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He did miss multiple games with an injury. Joe Flacco came in and played great. And Joe Flacco doesn't qualify for ranking in QBR because he's only played a couple of games. But if he did, he would be 4th in the NFL behind only Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, and Joe Burrow. When Joe Flacco has played, he has played like one of the best quarterbacks in the league this season. And if you are serious about winning games, and I think right now the Colts should be, because thanks to the Packers beating the Texans yesterday, the Colts are now 1 game behind the Texans for the lead in the AFC South. So while I do hope that Anthony Richardson continues to learn and to grow and to get some of those mistakes out of his mind, get some of learn to move past some of those things, Anthony Richardson has not had a game this season. The only game that he's had a completion percentage above 50% was in the Pittsburgh game that he left twice due to injury. And that's because he only threw 4 passes. Anthony Richardson, the reason he was picked 4th and the reason that he was named the starting quarterback is because of his ability to make the big play. It's because of his show-stopping ability to hit on the big one, the 60-yard plays, the big runs, the breaking tackles. We saw the throw he made to Alec Pierce early in the year, which could go down as the throw of the season. But none of that matters if you can't make the slant throw 5 yards down the field on 2nd and 8. None of that matters if you miss a receiver right in front of you on a drag route by throwing it 3 yards behind him. The big splashy play doesn't matter if you cannot make the fundamental easy throw. And right now, Anthony Richardson cannot do that. And you cannot win football games against legitimate competition if you cannot do those things. So if Shane Steichen and the Colts are serious about winning games and playing for the division, which I'll remind you again, they are 1 game out, Joe Flacco has to start. There was even talk from the analysts during the game that said they should put in Joe Flacco because the Colts had gone 6 of their first 10 drives. They went 3 and out. Didn't even pick up a first down. And the beginnings of games are when your plays are scripted. These are the plays that you practice over and over again, preparing for this game. You have a concrete game plan for the most part going into the game. The first couple of drives are scripted. And those are the throws Anthony Richardson was missing. Those are the plays he wasn't able to make. So what I find really telling, step back from the win, what I find really telling is that the Dolphins were playing with a 3rd-string quarterback by the end of the day. They barely even targeted Tyreek Hill. They weren't doing anything on offense, and it still took the Colts with Anthony Richardson until the end of the game to take the lead and keep it. They only scored 1 touchdown, and it was a rushing touchdown from the running back. The rest were field goals. this team struggles to get in the end zone with Anthony Richardson. Joe Flacco, on the other hand, in relief of Anthony Richardson against the Steelers, found the end zone twice very quickly. I'll say it again. If the Colts are serious about winning games and making the playoffs this year, which is a very realistic possibility, if the season ended today, they'd be in the playoffs. They need to start Joe Flacco. And that's what frustrates me a little bit about Shane Steichen's coaching style. It's a little bit reckless. I felt like he stuck with Anthony Richardson a little bit too long, and I don't see the improvement that I'd like to see week to week from Anthony Richardson. I think Flacco needs to finish out the season if they're serious about making a playoff run. We mentioned Jaden Daniels a minute ago as being one of the top 4 in QBR this season. He did leave the Commanders' win against the Carolina Panthers early with a rib injury. Dan Quinn believes that it is week to week, so they don't think he'll miss any time, but they are going to be very careful with him. So if he is forced to miss time, Marcus Mariota will step in and start. But I think Washington's in a good place right now that they can afford to put Mariota out there if they have to, and keep Jaden Daniels clean. Let those ribs heal, because you don't want to mess with ribs because there's not much you can do, but you just don't want to aggravate him more. And he's playing at a very, very high level as a rookie. It's rather remarkable. So Dan Quinn says they will monitor to make sure that he's able to go, and we'll see if he ends up having to miss some time. The other thing that I wanted to mention in the NFL before we get out of here is Deshaun Watson is out for the season with a torn Achilles, and it ironically and unfortunately came the same game that Nick Chubb returned from IR. And I get it, things are not pleasant in Cleveland, and I feel bad for Cleveland sports fans. Your baseball team is good right now, but they now have the longest championship streak in sports. Your basketball team is finally won it in 2016 and is a playoff team, but can't seem to get over the hump with the new regime. And your football team just can't seem to buy a win at the quarterback position. You had Baker Mayfield, and then you moved on from him because you could get Deshaun Watson, and then Baker Mayfield finds second life with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then Deshaun Watson just never reaches expectations. And then you get, 38-year-old Joe Flacco last year leading you to the playoffs with the best defense in the NFL. You think maybe we're finally turning the corner. You don't re-sign Joe Flacco. You bring back Deshaun Watson, and as I mentioned last week, it's very rare that you get your starting quarterback healthy and get significantly worse. And that's what's happened in Cleveland, to the point where when Deshaun Watson went down, Cleveland fans cheered at the fact that Deshaun Watson was leaving the game, and it was rather classless that they were cheering for someone to be leaving the game hurt. But at the same time, you can kind of feel the pain of Cleveland fans, that they have just been wrong at every turn when it comes to their quarterback. And so this is just another bump in that road. Jameis Winston is likely starting for the rest of the season for Cleveland. It's pretty much a lost season. They're not going to make the playoffs anyway. But it was a tough scene with the Cleveland Browns, watching Deshaun Watson go out for the season and fans cheer on the same day that they got Nick Chubb back. It was a tough look for Cleveland and a tough look for the NFL. Moving on to college football, Alabama suffers its second loss of the season to Tennessee. And I mentioned this, so I don't want to spend too much time on what I said last week, I've really talked about it the last few weeks, that this team has had a horrendous 4-game stretch, especially for Alabama. They had a 30-7 lead on Georgia. And if Georgia completes that comeback, which they were very, very close to, Alabama needed a game-winning touchdown to keep that from happening. We're talking about a 1-3 stretch. They needed that last-second touchdown to keep Georgia from completing the 30-7 comeback. They were trailing in this. They lost to Vandy. Obviously, they were trailing in the second half against South Carolina 19-14 after leading 14-0, and won that game close. And now they lose to Tennessee when their offense was non-existent in the first half. And you have players like former defensive back and two-time national champion Will Lowry, who played for Nick Saban, said 15 penalties and we want to punch the other team in the face after the play with 1 minute to go trying to win the game. We don't deserve to win. Between that and how 13 acted at the end of Vandy, it's just not how we do it at Bama, win or loss. Got to be better than that, guys. And clearly somebody responded to that, and that quoted tweet was taken down. But then Will Lowry responded to that. He said, "To be clear, I meant they didn't deserve to win that game yesterday," talking about the Tennessee game, "because of the penalties and lack of discipline. Not generally speaking this season. It's a 12-team playoff. They have as much opportunity to turn things around and make a run as anybody else. It's up to the players and the staff." So this goes to what I was talking about last week, where the sense of discipline that Nick Saban had installed at Alabama is seemingly out the window. This is a different animal. This team does not look ready. They look out. Kalen DeBoer looks overwhelmed in the SEC in his first year, and I know that I had somebody respond to a clip last week, and they said, well, Kirby Smart lost to Vandy in his first year, and Nick Saban, they said during the Tennessee loss that it was the first time that Alabama had lost 2 games before November since 2007, which was Nick Saban's first year. And I say 2 things to that. One, regarding Kirby Smart, is that Kalen DeBoer is following Nick Saban, where yes, there are a lot of players transferred out, so he doesn't get the benefit of most of Saban's players. But he walked into a culture that still existed from Nick Saban. He walked into a winning culture. He walked into a locker room of mostly winning players. And the difference between him losing to Vandy and Kirby Smart losing to Vandy in his first year is that Kirby Smart built the winning culture at Georgia. He was the successor to Mark Richt, who was a very good coach and a very good guy, but a coach who famously and historically could not get over the hump of getting the national championship game, of winning the national championship game. So Kirby Smart was not following a championship culture. Kalen DeBoer was following a dynasty, and I say it all the time, that you never want to be the guy after the guy. And that is extremely prevalent in this situation, because while he was coming in on Nick Saban's, at the end of Nick Saban's championship culture, a culture can walk out the door as quickly as the man who built it. And that's what we're seeing with Alabama. And while Kirby Smart built the championship culture, it seems that Kalen DeBoer either is tearing it down or being crushed under the weight of it. And that's the part that I think is a little unfair about being the guy after the guy. That's why I've said it repeatedly. And I honestly don't believe it's going to get better next year. The only real offensive playmakers that Alabama has are Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams. And Jalen Milroe is going to leave, probably for the NFL. And if last year's any indication, we have no idea who the starter is going to be for Alabama next year. Jalen Milroe won the job after a free-for-all because it didn't seem like anybody in the quarterback room wanted the job at the beginning of last year when things were looking rough in Nick Saban's final year. Jalen Milroe finally stepped up, took it, and then they turned things around. But pretty much everybody else in that quarterback room from last year is gone. One guy transferred, one guy went to play lacrosse. So for the first time in a while, we have no idea who the next quarterback is going to be. Alabama during Nick Saban's dynasty, we always had an idea of who was coming next, from John Parker Wilson to Greg McElroy to AJ McCarron to Mac Jones. And now, like, we don't know who the next person's going to be. And it seems like every score that Alabama does make, it's Ryan Williams on the other end, the 17-year-old. I don't think it's going to get better next year. It's definitely going to get worse before it gets better. Whether it's Kalen DeBoer figuring things out and settling into the SEC, or the getting better is the guy after the guy after the guy coming in. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not rooting for Kalen DeBoer to fail. I'm just saying that it looks like he is overwhelmed in his first 7 games at the University of Alabama. And the last 4 games in particular have been really rough. And you say, well, they beat Georgia. Yeah, but they had a 30-7 lead at halftime. And they needed a last-second touchdown to win, despite forcing Carson Beck into 4 turnovers. If Carson Beck doesn't turn over the ball 4 times, I think Georgia wins by 20 or 30 points, especially after we saw what they did to Texas. I think Georgia wins that game handily if Carson Beck doesn't commit 4 turnovers. So I look at the last 4 games and I'm like, they might be winning a couple of these, but something's not right. And it's not going to get easier to end the season because Alabama still has to play at LSU. They have to play Oklahoma. They have to play Auburn, which Oklahoma and Auburn aren't that good this season, but Oklahoma is still Oklahoma, and Auburn always plays them tough. Rivalry games are always a toss-up. You will always bring your best. And so they better not look past Auburn. They better not look past Oklahoma because they have to go to Oklahoma. They have to go to Norman, Oklahoma. And also, they have to play against Missouri, who is 6-1. They are one of the most exciting teams in college football this year. Missouri is ranked 9th in total defense. And I think there's a realistic chance that Alabama could lose at least 2 of these last 5 games. The other game that I didn't mention was against Mercer. So hopefully they don't lose that. If they lose that, Kalen DeBoer might be escorted out on the spot. But in 4 of these last 5, it's at LSU, at Oklahoma, versus Auburn, and versus Missouri. And I think they will lose to Missouri, and I think they will lose to LSU. So that's 2 right there. And I think they could lose to Oklahoma, and if they're not paying attention, they could lose to Auburn. I don't think this is getting better this season. I think, as I saw on Reddit this week, somebody said, "Welcome back to Earth, Alabama fans. We've been waiting for you." This is the hard landing that Alabama fans have not experienced in a long time. I think Alabama rushed to hire Kalen DeBoer. I do think he's a great football coach, but I think right now he looks completely overwhelmed in the SEC. On to a more positive note, we have a couple of surprise teams this season. Whereas Iowa State, Indiana, and Miami all remain unbeaten. Miami's quarterback Cam Ward looks right now to be the Heisman favorite, other than maybe Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Cam Ward has the Miami Hurricanes as the number 1 team in total offense so far this season. They've already scored 50-plus points in 4 separate games this year, which is a program record. And to the people that say, oh, they haven't really played anybody, whatever, I'll bring you the same argument that I used in defense of the Washington Commanders last week, in saying the only thing you can do is play who's in front of you, and that is what Miami is doing, and they are winning big, which is making an impression on the committee, as Miami is currently ranked 6th in the nation. But the other teams that I want to mention, as I said, Iowa State, Indiana, and Miami. I want to give flowers to Iowa State because I do have a little bit of a personal connection to Iowa State, because when I was in high school, our quarterback, who graduated the same year as I did, went to Iowa State, and played there for, I believe, 4 years. And so for that stretch of time, pretty much everybody in my high school was rooting for Iowa State and rooting for our guy to succeed. And so it's always nice to see them succeed. And it's obviously the alma mater of Mr. Irrelevant, Brock Purdy. But I want to spend a moment talking about Indiana. Indiana is the first time since 1967 that Indiana is undefeated through the first 7 games. Their head coach, Curt Cignetti, I hope I'm saying that correctly, is quickly becoming one of the top stories in college football. This seems like a guy that's got a chip on his shoulder. He's been quoted as telling recruits, "It's simple, I win, Google me." And if you Google Curt Cignetti, much like Kalen DeBoer when he became the hottest commodity, all he does is win. Curt was on the original staff for Nick Saban at Alabama, where he was the wide receiver coach and the recruiting coordinator. Cignetti coached Julio Jones and was responsible for recruiting Heisman Trophy winner Mark Ingram and linebacker Dante Hightower. Then, after a few years, Curt Cignetti left Alabama to go be a Division II head coach at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And he managed to coach them to a 53-17 overall record in 6 years. Then he went on to Elon, where he was 14-9 overall in 2 seasons. Then to James Madison, where he was 62-9 over 5 seasons. And now this is his first year at Indiana. His total coaching record is 126-35. And unlike Kalen DeBoer, whose path also included Indiana University, one thing I really like about Curt Cignetti is that he coaches with a chip on his shoulder. I like him. It feels like he's got something to prove, not only to everybody else in the country, but he's got something to prove to himself. Not only does he tell recruits, "I win, Google me," but I believe I read somewhere that he said that he was always the guy that was told, like, that he was going to be the next, that he was always going to be the next guy, and he kept getting passed up. And so he kind of took it into his own hands and went to do his thing, and now he's taking Indiana, which has always kind of been a basketball school. Like, nobody really cared about Indiana football. And in the last couple of years, they've been a little bit better, and they've gotten a little bit more notoriety, and they've been ranked a couple times, but they haven't been a serious threat. But all of a sudden, here's Indiana, 7-0 for the first time since the 60s, and currently ranked 14th in the nation, according to the AP Top 25. And I just really like Curt Cignetti. I gotta be honest, I wasn't aware of Indiana. I wasn't aware of Curt Cignetti until a couple of weeks ago. And from what I've heard from him, from what I'm seeing from Indiana, they just put up 56 points on a Nebraska team that many people thought was going to be the surprise, kind of sexy pick before the season. They beat them 56-7, despite the fact that their star quarterback, Rourke, left that game with an injury. This team is just blowing teams out. Obviously, some of those are paid games, but they beat FIU 31-7. They beat West Illinois 77-3. They beat UCLA 42-13. Charlotte 52-14. Maryland 42-28. Northwestern 41-24. Nebraska 56-7. Now, in the coming weeks, we'll see what they're actually made of, as their next 4 games are against Washington, at Michigan State, versus Michigan, and at Ohio State. So we will see very quickly if this Indiana team is for real. But for right now, I love what I'm seeing from Indiana and head coach Curt Cignetti. And they are my surprise team this season, and I cannot wait to see what those next 4 games have in store. One other quick thing that I had in college football that I wanted to get to is Arizona State head coach Kenny Dillingham made headlines after Saturday when he called out Arizona State's kicking game for missing 2 late field goals to keep them from having a chance to win a game against Cincinnati late. And he later apologized for his comments, but at his post-game press conference was when he made news that he basically called on Arizona State University students and said, if you can kick, we're having open tryouts on Monday. Please come to the tryouts because we gotta have somebody that can make field goals. And he later apologized because he didn't think about it at the time because he was too fired up. And he later apologized because he realized that when you're calling out the kicking game, you're calling out one person. And he said that his post-game comments of the Sun Devils kicking game were unacceptable because of the negative impact it had on kicker Ian Hershey. He said, quote, "Just when I realized it was affecting a kid," Dillingham said Monday, of when he decided an apology on X was necessary. He said, "I've never in my career done anything that had a negative effect on a kid, and I've had some really bad seasons, really bad play, and absolutely failed him." Now, his comments for a new kicker came after Hershey is 7 of 12 on the season in field goal attempts and missed both tries in the fourth quarter of Saturday's 24-14 loss against Cincinnati. So those were pretty crucial field goals, kept him from having a chance to win the game at the end. And he did say tryouts will still happen because he got a bunch of emails from prospective kickers, and he said someone's going to have to go prove himself. So Kenny Dillingham did apologize for the comments he made. He said they were out of line, but he did stand by them in the sense that they are still holding tryouts. Those should have been today. Maybe they pushed them back. I don't know. But those tryouts should have taken place today. So we will keep an eye on that interesting story. They lost a pretty big conference game to Cincinnati, who has the same record as them, but has a 3-1 conference record as opposed to, as I mentioned, Arizona State's 2-2. So Kenny Dillingham, in a moment that was pretty stressful, called out the kicker and then later apologized, but did say that those kicking tryouts are still going on. The last thing I want to touch on is that we are recording this on Monday as we usually do, and the NBA season kicks off tomorrow with just a couple of games. We have the New York Knicks at the Boston Celtics and the Minnesota Timberwolves at the Los Angeles Lakers. So just a doubleheader on Tuesday before the rest of the action kicks off on Wednesday, but that is a significant doubleheader as you have the two teams that were involved in that pretty shocking Karl-Anthony Towns trade, one of them playing against the defending champion Boston Celtics, that being the New York Knicks, and the other playing against the Los Angeles Lakers in the first regular season appearance of LeBron James and Bronny James on the court together if Bronny James gets into the game, which I would not be surprised if we don't see Bronny James on the floor in the NBA regular season because he had a truly terrible preseason. So we'll have to wait and see how the Lakers handle the James situation because we're at this moment in time, Bronny James has not proved himself to be ready for the NBA, and he will probably spend most of the season, if not all of the season, in the G League. So that is all I have for you on episode 99 of Empire Sports Talk, and I want to take a minute here at the end and thank everyone. And it's a modest following at this point, but I've been doing this a long time as a hobby, chasing a dream that's a dream that I've had since I was very, very young, thanks to incredible voices like Stuart Scott and Vin Scully. This is something I wanted to do since I was very, very young, and I work so hard every week to bring you guys this podcast and to bring you guys extra stuff on our YouTube channel and now our brand new website, EmpireSportsTalk.com, and I appreciate every one of you. As I mentioned, we're growing, but it's a modest growth, and I appreciate every single one of you that interacts with us and give us encouragement and constructive criticism to help this podcast grow and get better. This has been a dream for my entire life, and to get to bring you these episodes is truly, truly something I enjoy, and I appreciate every single one of you. I don't know where this is going to take me. I don't know if I'm going to have an opportunity to make a career out of this, but regardless of what happens, I want to thank each and every one of you that has supported Empire Sports Talk and supported me to this point, and I truly am appreciative, and I will not forget it anytime soon. I am Roman Gennaro. Today's a good day to go 1-0. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this, and I'll see you on the next one, which will be episode 100. See you there.